Hey guys, welcome back to my show. Continuing on with this corner cabinet, what we're going to look at in this webisode, as I'm now told it's called, is we're going to look at squaring up our panels and getting all of our dados cut where they're supposed to be. So sit back, enjoy, let's get to it. Okay guys, got all my panels processed up, brought them out. Everything is exactly at 3/4, the sides and the shelves. Now one of the things that I do is I take my dado blade and I will run a groove in a scrap piece of wood so that when I'm processing my material, I can keep checking it to that groove to make sure it's fitting just like I want. I don't rely on a tape measure because, you know, dado blades can be a little bit, and it doesn't matter whether you're using a dado blade or you're using a router with a 3/4 bit. You know, they can vary just a little bit, particularly if they've been sharpened. And, you know, as long as you've got, in this case, as long as you've got your shelves will fit into that dado, you're okay. Being dead on 3/4 isn't going to be a big issue. As long as they're whatever you're going to use to cut the grooves, that shelf fits into. Then what I did is I came out here and I took the big size and I glued mine all up in one big panel. And so what I did is I rough cut them. I went to my storyboard and the bottom case is to be, I actually glued these up at 80 inches. The bottom case is to be 36 inches tall, so I'm about 36 3/4 or something like that. And all I did was took a jigsaw and rough cut it, just so I had easier panels to work with. Now, the next thing I did, and again I glued them up wide. I think we had said 25. I think mine came in about 26 or one almost 27. What I did then was I took and I ran it through the table saw, skimmed one edge, flipped it around, did the other edge on all the panels. Now the reason I did that, if you noticed, when I glued them up, I did not use any cawls or any sticks on the outside to prevent clamp marks. So I wanted to make sure I had them removed. I knew I would be able to do that, so I didn't bother using the cawls to protect it. If you're gluing up tight, in other words, if you're gluing up close, then make sure that you use a cawl. Now the other thing that happens is clamps compress wood. I always glue up wide and come back and trim both sides. That makes sure that I'm dead parallel on both sides. And you're going to understand what I'm talking about. If you've ever checked, you can, if you're indexing off of this one side and you square it, and it's truly square, and yet you come to this side and check it and it's not. That can be because you're not parallel on both sides. So that's something you may want to take a look at. Is doing that, is even as after it's glued up, is do that, you know, hit both edges to make sure that they're just right. Then when I came in, all I've got here is just a straight piece of wood. And I clamped it across the end square. And I was very particular to make sure it was square. Now what I'm going to be using to do this, if you've got a big panel cutter or another means, then that's good, that's fine. What I'm going to be using here is a spiral cut, upcut bit. And I'm going to have to get locked down here a little better than what I am. And all I'm going to do is router cut it. And by that, what I mean is the bearing will run along my straight edge and trim my end. I better be careful here. I got to move this clamp back. Be right back. Now, all right, I see what I did. I had to move that clamp back because my router was going to hit it. Now the other thing I could use on this, going from the opposite direction, would just be a simple pattern maker's bit. And that's where the bearing is on the top, and I would be cutting down. In that case, it would be, the panel would be flipped over and we would be running this direction. And the router would actually be resting against the straight edge. I like the spiral cuts because they give a nice clean cut. And they last really well. They're expensive, but they do a nice job. All right, let's get this thing cut. All right, as you can well see, that cuts a really nice line. But I could still get a little chip out here if I'm not careful. But see, what we're getting ready to do is we're getting ready to start cutting our dados in this. And we're going to cut all those dados with it wide. And in case we get some chip out here. Now the other thing with a corner cabinet, we're going to have to be cutting angles on these. And leaving it a little bit wide, if you happen to mess up and flip instead of flop, well, you got a little bit of extra room there to recover. I never go to my exact width until the last minute. Always keep them wide. Now the objective here is to get everything cut to length. Now that I've cut this one panel, I will use it as my index for everything else, or my pattern. But I want to make sure I'm square. Now what happens if I'm not? I'm dead on the money. But if you would have made a mistake, here's the thing. Let's assume for a minute this isn't square. Okay, because, hey, that happens. What you would be able to do would, because this has got extra length, you would be able to adjust your board and hit it again until you've got one perfectly square edge. That's how you recover from a mistake. When you're building something, just figure on the worst case scenario. Figure it's going to go wrong. And a lot of times it does. Now, what we're going to do is, again, like I said, we're just going to use that pattern for everything else. All I got to do is set my other one up here. Now listen, when you're doing a router cut, don't try to hog it. Don't get crazy. Make sure everything is perfectly lined up. Now there's another point. You know, if you get off a little bit, but you get off equally, you can recover pretty easy. That's not hard. It's when you get everything all crazy. That's hard. Now, it's just do it again. Then, let me run this real quick and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Y'all supposed to tell me when I forget that stuff. Come on, I'm old. Ooh. Man, when I said I rough cut them, I wasn't joking. Now, there's a lot of guys out there who are just getting into woodworking. So I want to show you something. Most of your jigsaws are going to have a lever on it. And if you look right here, there's a lot of chip. It'll be all right. It's going to be the bottom, I think. Maybe not, but anyway. This lever changes the pitch. In other words, it takes the saw blade and it pushes it out or back in. And what that does is that will cause it to cut very aggressive, which will give you some chip out, but just for roughing out, it's fine, it's faster. Middle, not so much, and when you come to the back, it brings the blade straighter so you don't get, or back a little bit so you don't get that, quite all that rough cut. That's what that lever's about. All right, we got that end square. Now what I got to do is simply measure this 36 inches and rough cut it again. Then I'm going to line it up and I'm going to cut my top and my bottom using the same panel. So I don't have to keep putting that. See what I'm doing? All I'm doing is mirror imaging this whole thing. See how close I am here. I done lost the tape measure again. There it is. All right, I'm about 36 3/4 here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this off at about 36 3/16 or something like that with the jigsaw. And then we'll come back and route it. Okay guys, I'm all cut and square. Now, we're going to start laying out for our dados. Now on our storyboard here, this is the bottom case we're working on. We've got a 4.5 inch base. We've got a 1 inch space. And we're not worried about the door yet. Then up here, when we get up here, then we leave a space for our door, our space, drawer, space, and the top. So we got to lay all that out. Now I'm going to explain this as I go. Well, let's start with the base. I got a 4.5 inch base and a 1 inch space. That's 5.5 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure up 5.5 inches. See, I told you I had one of them flat tapes. Just had to go find it. So I'm going to measure up 5.5 inches. Now here's something I like to do. When we close our door on the bottom, I want to have a door closure. I want something stopping the door. So I want the floor to actually come up above that 1 inch space. About 1/4 inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come up to 5 3/4. Then I'm going to measure from that point back 3/4. That will be the floor. Now I'm going to note that on my storyboard while I'm here. Shelf 1/4 above space for door closure. All right, now I'm going to lay that out. Now I'm going to mark it out here on the edge because that's where I'm going to be working to get it. And I'm going to make it really nice and dark. So I'm going to use my little gel, black gel pen. They don't make as fine a line as I like, but as you can see, boy, they make a nice. Now, but I have to maintain, I can't get confused here, and that's easy to do, because this is actually going to be the bottom. This is going to be the bottom of the case opening. And my pencil broke. I don't want to write with this pen. Let me get a pencil. Here we go. Still want to have a compass. All right. Now, from our 1 inch space opening to the bottom of the next space opening. Did I write the total door height on here? I did not. All right, let me see what I got here. I'm 23 3/4. Is that right? Let me double check this. It looks like 23 7/8. $23 3/4. That's going to work. Total door. 23 3/4. All right. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go from what will be the bottom of my case up 23 3/4. Now, I'm going to do the exact same thing, except I'm going to do it in reverse. My case top. Case top, bottom, spacer. Now I'm going to back down 3/4 of an inch. I mean 1/4 of an inch. Go up 3/4. That's where I'm going to put my my dado. Again, I'm going to create a bottom closure. Now, if you're really following close, you're probably wondering how I'm going to guide the drawer. Because the drawer, something for the drawer to run on is going to have to sit at the top of this opening when we get into our drawer opening. And I'll show you how we do that when we get there. Don't want to confuse you here. Now what you have, just to make sure you understand this, what's going to happen is that when we get our face frame on here, this shelf and this bottom is actually going to hang down past it on the top a quarter and be up above the bottom a quarter. So that when we close our door has something to go against. Now, the top up here, all I got to do here is simply make a flush 3/4 inch for the top to go in. Not difficult. But I'm going to note this on my all right, so I'm going to be a quarter below below space for door closure. All right, now right now we're just dealing with this bottom case. We'll get to the top case in a minute. So I'm ready to go cut some dados because I want to get some cutting done in this. All right, so I got to put a dado right here on this top. I'll work it out. All right, let's go cut some dados, guys. That'll do. Yep. Now again, you have to stay oriented here because I'm indexing in this case to do this center one. I'm indexing off the bottom because even though the shelf is in the center of the opening, it's not in the center of the panel. So it does make a difference from which end you're oriented. And in that case, I'm going from the bottom. What happens if you cut a dado in the wrong place? Well, the fact that you're going to be painting this, you just kind of take your little body filler or something and fill it and maybe say some things that aren't real nice and get on with the program. But let's assume for a minute you put a dado in the wrong place and you're not painting it. Then what do you do? Well, to put a big old gob of filler down through there would just look awful. These little end cuts you took off, don't throw them away real fast. Because what you can do is trim this down to 3/4 wide turn it on its side and cut you a little piece out of it, matching your grain the best you can, and glue it in place. Because the grain on it's going to be running vertical just as the grain in the panel is. It's probably not going to be invisible, all right? But whoever sees it from 100 years from now is going to say, look, he made a mistake, and look how good he was. That means it's okay for me to make one. Because it happens to the best of us. Now, I ain't going to tell you how I know about that, okay? But don't throw them away anytime soon. Might need them. All right, we got 2 bottom cases dadoed up. Now we're going to have to come back over here and start laying out for our upper case. So Crystal, if you want to move the camera over, we'll do that. All right, we got to lay out this upper shelf, or the upper case rather. Now we've got, looking back at our storyboard, we've got a 7/8 molding, 1-inch space, and this is our door, glass, mullion. We laid it all out. So what we're going to do is we're going to have that 7/8 molding in our 1-inch space. So it's 1 7/8 inches. But we're going to do the exact same thing on the bottom. Now, this will only be on the bottom. We're going to elevate the shelf a little bit to give us a door closure. Now, in the top of it, where we've got the top going all the way to the top, obviously, when we get up here to the top of this door, we're not going to be able to use the shelf as a door closure. So when we build the case, we'll actually come in behind that and put a little piece in there to make one. And it'll be coming down, and it looks nice. But at the moment, so I've got 1 7/8 inches. So I'm going to lay that out. Let me get my trusty lead pencil. All right, I got 1 7/8 inches. Now I'm going to go 1/4 above it. Then I'm going to go, of course, 1/2 below it. I can't even see the thing. All right. So this is going to be my face frame line right here. And this is going to be my dado. All right. 1/4 above face frame for door stop. All right. Now, then I've got my 2 3/4 inches will be my door bottom. 9.5 inch glass to the mullion. So 9.5, 2 3/4. I know some of y'all out there just rattling these off. Is that 12 1/4? I think so. I'm on the center scale side of that. Yep, looks like 12 1/4 to me. Now be careful when you're laying this out. Don't make sure you go from the bottom of the face frame and not this dado. All right, 12 1/4. Then we're going to draw in 1 inch. Now, because our face frame, because our shelf is 3/4, there's always a little controversy of whether that mullion, when you put the mullion in the door, whether it should set dead flat at the top of the shelf or whether it should set in the center of the mullion. You can talk to, a whole lot of people, and one says that that shelf is supposed to set dead flat at the top of the mullion. The other one says, you know, it can go a little bit below it. We're only talking, you know, 1/8 of an inch, top and bottom. So I'm going to put it in the center. Now the reason I'm going to put it in the center is in the event that there's the least little thing off, it's going to be hidden. So you start to get a lot of lines in here, and you got to stay, okay, this is the dado, and this is a 1-inch mullion. All right, move on. And the reason we want to be careful there is now, we've got a 9.5-inch glass. That's our exposure. So I'm going from here up 9.5. Again, my inch, back down 1/8, up 1/8 to give me my all right. Then we're going a 9.5-inch glass and a 2.25-inch door top. So again, 9.5, 2.25. $11 3/4. See, remember the bottom of the door is 2 3/4. The top of the door is 2 1/4. So that's why you have a difference in the width of this shelf and the upper. Okay, Crystal had a question. And maybe I said something wrong. I'm working on the top case, but I'm working from the bottom of the top case up. Gotcha? This will be our top case. That's the bottom of the top case. All right, 11 3/4. Now this is where my door is going to come in. My door is going to land right there. But see, we don't really want to put a dado in there, and this is what I was explaining. And the reason we don't want to put a dado in there is that we have one right here in the top. So we'll have to put a closure strip on the face frame, on the back side of the face frame. So we don't need it. We've got our top dado. So we only need a top, mullion, and the bottom. Got that? You'll see, it'll all come together for you. Now we're ready to head back to the table saw. Cut these dados. Okay, I'm ready to cut my dados. Now I'm not going to bore you with you sitting here watching me just keep shoving boards across a table saw. But again, what I want to do on this upper case, which is taller, I'm going to run this one. Then I'm going to flip around so that I'm running shorter. In other words, I don't have as much, I don't want to try to run a big wide panel against the fence out here cutting over here. I'm too stretched out. So I'll show you very quickly. Now I've still got the other panel to cut, but obviously you can see, for me to cut this one, I'm going to have this one about here, so I'm going to be way over here trying to hold. It's kind of cumbersome. But if I turn this around and cut this one coming from this direction, then see, I'm not going to be that way. I'm not going to be stretched out. You know, so the distance from the fence, the shortest distance I can get from the fence to the blade is the way I want to run it. Okay, let me get these cut and we're going to come back. All right, guys, take a look. We got all our tops all dadoed, all of our cases dadoed, and they're ready. Now it's time to turn our focus to our shelf. Now I want to mention something. As soon as I move this storyboard, I'm going to take a blanket to cover this. When you got wide panels, if you just leave them lay out in the air, you'll see them cup. And the reason for that is that one surface, the exposed surface, will dry out a little bit. And when that happens, when wood dries, it shrinks. And so what happens is the top of this will start to shrink a little bit and it'll start to cup. And I don't want that, so I keep it covered or in a plastic bag. Now, I got an issue. Well, sort of, not really. My piece of MDF that I'm going to make my shelf pattern out of wasn't wide enough. Why? Well, that's simple. Remember when we were doing the layout, and the reason I'm showing you this, I don't want you freaking out if that runs into you, is that when we did our layout and we actually extended the face of the corner cabinet out a little bit, and I realize Crystal's telling me she's having a hard time getting you to see this, but you saw it when we were up high and did it. We extended the front of the shelf out because our 42 inches was from this point to this point. So, but remember, we actually came, and what we did is we extended out and then came down. It's that point where we extended it out that made my shelf pattern too narrow. So what I simply did was I just simply glued a piece on it so I can go for it. But I thought you'd get a kick out of seeing the way you glue a piece on a corner cabinet. See the caul in the back? It's about the only way you can get to the corners. So while this is drying, we're going to take a look. We got a term around here in the South called, I'm going to wet your whistle. I'm going to give you a little sample of what's coming. So we're going to go to the back and I'm going to let you see something. Come on. All right, guys, this is the wood we're going to be making the face out of. This is some instrument grade tiger maple. Yeah, I know. But I thought just for kicks, I'd slide it through the planer. Just a piece of it, just kind of let you take a look. It just came in, so let's take a look at what we're going to be doing. Now I'm going to turn my mic off because I don't want to blast your ears. That's right pretty, huh? That ought to make one that'll scream. All right, let's go back and get to that shelf. All right, guys, I think I've got this thing. I think this glue's dry enough, so we're going to roll on. The first thing I want to do is I want to get me one good 45-degree side. So I'm just going to take my straight edge here and I'm going to make me one. It's got a rounded end, that ain't working. Let me get my straight edge up here. And make sure the front of your shelf up here is straight. I just want to barely skim one side of this to get it dead on 45, and that looks good to me. Now I'm just using a good combination square just to get my line. All right. Now, since this is going to be a pattern, lost the screw, what can I say? Actually, because this bench has got the holes in it, sometimes that happens. They'll get drill bits, they'll get a lot of things. All right, that looks pretty good. Now we go into the table saw. All right, you saw this before when we were straight lining. Now with this pattern and with my fence, this makes me a pattern cutter. Now I could just as easily do this with a router bit, but this is just, we got a lot of shelves, so this is just all too quick and easy. That's sweet, ain't it? That's quick. Yeah, it does nice. But you see now why I was telling you the pattern that we want to leave them shelves a little longer in the corners so we got something to screw this to. All right, now let's go back and start fitting. Now I'm going to make this easier. I've got one side. Let me double check and just make sure that I am, well, I done lost my bearing surface. That's okay. It's 45. All right, I'm going to get a shelf. All right, I got a shelf blank here. And I'm going to set this up. Make sure I'm straight. And flush. And I'm going to mark it. Yeah, I know I forgot the pencil again. I do that a lot. Now all I'm going to do is go to the bandsaw and I'm going to whack this one side off. I'm just going to rough it and leave the line. Now I'm going to use the same pattern and the same straight side to get my shelf. And I'm going to do some measuring and some calculating here, and we'll be right back. All right, guys, before I bandsaw this, I'm going to go ahead and get the pattern worked out, just so I can do it all one time. Here on the story, this squiggly line, that's going to be the face frame. Remember, we had to move it back to get a little bit more width for the door, for the glasses. From this point, which is the back of our shelf, to this point is 3 inches. From this point to the other side, a straight line across, which will be our widest point, this will be the inside, is 42 3/8 inches. So here's what I did. And this is going to be hard to see because I'm on the nasty side of my piece of MDF. What I did is I went over here and I set my combination square to 3 inches. And when it lined up to this point and this point, I drew my 45, I drew my line. Now, let me show you that. Let me get around here, Chris. All I did was index off my 45-degree side. I set my combination square at 3 inches, and I just moved up until I was point to point, and I drew the line. Simple as that. Then what I did is I said, okay, at that point, this is now like 2 1/16 or something like that, down to this corner, straight down. I drew a line all the way across it. Out to my outer end. Then I measured from this point right here over 42 3/8 inches. Then all I had to do was take my 45 on my combination square and go to that point and draw my line. Now that will ultimately be our shelf right there, and then the 45 down. But what that also does, that also gives me the point on this side from where I have to cut this shelf to get my full pattern. So I've got to take this side off. We're going to do it the exact same way. Now this piece of MDF, I can just throw screws in it anywhere, anywhere I want. I'm going to scoot that back a little bit, or I'm going to put that screw right through that glue joint. All right. Pretty good. Looks good to me. All right, going to the table saw, just as we did, and I'm going to cut it. Be right back. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to double check myself and make sure that I'm lining up where I want to be. We're good. Okay. Now, if you notice, I've still got a lot here in the back, and I've got these corners. So that's my point, that on my shelf, I'll be using to screw it down to make my pattern. So I'm going to line back up here with the line I've already drawn. Ooh, that's cutting that close. Alright. Now the reason I'm just gonna knock these off with a bandsaw. Could do it with the jigsaw, is just then we're gonna go to the table saw and just cut the shelf out. Here we go. So I'm just gonna pop these off real quick, leaving the line pretty kind of heavy. And the main thing on this is make sure your front's nice and straight and flush. Alright, I'm not going to move the camera, but I'm going to leave it on just so you can listen. You'll see how long it takes to cut this. As you well know, not much. There we go. And we'll get these corners a little later. Don't worry about them right now. But we got the beginnings of a corner cabinet. I might be fitting the mic too good. Now you know, now I'm going to mention this, like I told you, I'll fit something that tight if I was going to be finishing the inside, because by the time I take a random orbit and stand the top and the bottom of that shelf, it's going to go in there. In this case, the 150 that we ran these panels through was the final cut. The way I did these panels, I started with a 36, then I made a couple passes, then I went to an 80, a couple passes, and then I jumped to a 120, and then I gave it a final hit with a little bit of 150. Now, one of the things with a drum sanders are not going to give you a finish that you don't have to sand. But when you finish it out going with the grain at 150, it don't take a lot. You know, you still got to use your random orbits and sand them, but it doesn't take much to do it. But the other side to that is, and this is just a footnote, when we get into that tiger maple and curly cherry, man, that can be tough. We got the burns to contend. And if you don't know what I'm talking about with that and how to deal with that, let's see, this is October. We're just now putting out our October, November newsletter, and so it'd be October, November of 09 whenever you see this. So if you go back to the website and refer to that newsletter, there's a write-up on drum sanders, using them, how to use your sandpaper and deal with that and whatever. So, but, you know, just want a good fit. Okay, now what we got to do is we got to just keep on going. Now, again, I could just bore you to tears watching me just keep on cutting shelves. The only thing I'm going to do, though, is I am going to pull up one of the doubles, you know, and show you that. Hey, did y'all notice from the last episode that, look at this, there's still some scratches in it. I scraped and cleaned up the top of my bench, put a good coat of Waterlux on it, so it is getting kind of, y'all know what the word nasty means? It was nasty. So I was told. Now you notice I'm pulling these out. I had them over here covered up. All right. Now make sure you check these real good and make sure you don't have any clamp marks in the fronts, because you don't want that. You do just like we did the sides, just skim them a little bit, get them out. Smart thing to do is use some caws. Yeah, I know. I was in a hurry. All right. One shelf. One more shelf. I'll grab a, whoops. Oops, that's the word, not whoops, oops. I had a little Mexican boy work for me. He was legal. Tell you what, one of the best little woodworkers I ever seen in my life. And anyway, he moved away. I hate to see him go. But if something didn't go right, he'd come to me and he'd say, "Senor, I have a little oops." Sometimes I'll tell you one thing, though, I learned from him. Those guys' definition of little and ours, usually two different things, because when he told you he had a little oops, it usually wasn't real little. I'm going to tell you another quick story about him, too. In the summer, he'd shave his head. He completely took all the hair off. And in our big shop we used to have, he was down, and we had this whole big dining room table and hutch and all this chairs and everything was all made out of walnut. And as you know, I use some dye on walnut. Well, he was using what's called a light walnut dye, and of course it's kind of dark brown or brown. And he was down there, and he had his gloves and everything on, but obviously he had gotten an itch. And I walked downstairs to check on him, see how he was doing. I laughed. He was down, he's got his mask on and them gloves, but obviously he took his hand, he went just like this on the top of his head to scratch it, and there's a perfect big handprint with dye right on top. He didn't have a clue. That was pretty funny. Don't do that. All right, I'm going to take a jigsaw these out, and just keep on going until I get all my 8 shelves. Okay? Then we'll come back and deal with the corners. All right. I was cruising along yesterday afternoon, finishing up my shelves. And I ran into one of them oopses. I guess I shouldn't have been making fun of Antonio. I'll show you what I did. I glued a couple boards too short. Remember when I was showing you I was gluing up and I said I cut one too short? Looks like maybe it wasn't just one. And I thought all night who I could blame it on. Well. See what I did? I didn't glue long enough, and so I had a big corner in here, and you can see what I did. I took one of them corners off of the, when I bandsawed it out. You know, if you want to make a set of stair treads, that ought to give you a good idea how to do it. There you go. But anyway, so I took a corner and cut it and glued it in there. Call it a birthmark. I got a feeling there'll be maybe another 1 or 2 in here before we're done. What do you think? We'll just hide this one somewhere. Not a big deal. So in case you guys think I don't make mistakes, hang around. I'm good at them. You know, the only difference in professionals and hobby guys is that not that we don't make mistakes, it's just that we kind of know how to get out of them. Because we've made so many, we learn. And sometimes through all of that, you learn how to avoid them. All right, last shelf, straight line it. Then we're going to do the corners. Be right back. All right, time to cut the back. The actual width on this now is 18 1/4. Now I want to emphasize something. If you're building this corner cabinet and your dimensions vary a little bit from mine, that's fine, guys. Don't get yourself all worked up, you know? And, you know, don't. Now, what I'm telling you, what I'm measuring is from the back of the shelf, what will be the back, to the front edge. Now remember, this area in here, that's going to be our face frame. So all I got to do now is set my fence at 18 1/4 and cut them. All right, I want to check something. Now, I'm going to show you this now, but when we get to doing this face frame, I'll really emphasize it. Excuse me. Is we want to make sure a little mock-up pattern that we're going to fit in here, and we're looking pretty good. And one of the things you have to be careful of in a corner cabinet is sometimes, you know, if you don't have your angle right, your face frame will try to stick out here a little bit. And when we actually get to sawing this, what's going to happen is that we'll actually be very careful. And, you know, 22.5 that's what it's supposed to be. But if we got to fudge that angle just a little bit to make everything fit tight, we fudge the angle, don't sweat it. As long as this is coming up on its 45 and this is setting, you know, straight here and fitting our shelf, we're going to be fine. All right, I'm going to finish cutting the backs of the shelves, and next time we're going to trim our sides and put the carcass together. Now we have a new word. And I got a little blonde back here behind the camera, just chuckle. Crystal came up with a new term for these. These are not episodes. What are they, Crystal? Loud.
Webisodes.
Webisodes. So all white Wally, we gonna do webisodes. Webisodes. So I'll see you the next time on the next webisode.